Hello, I'm Gene Luedtke, President of the Carnegie Historical Museum Board of Directors, and welcome to another monthly program. This is our first program of the winter season. We have programs from September through usually June, and each month we feature a different subject, and we're really happy to have everybody come today. The Chautauqua program today is something I've heard people talk about for a long time. I hear stories from my mother and other people, and it always fascinates me. It's such an interesting part of Fairfield's heritage. So today on the Chautauquas, we have Frankie Beatty and Mary Evelyn Shaeffer, who are going to tell us some about the history of Chautauquas even before Fairfield, and then the 27, 28 years that Chautauqua existed in Fairfield for the summer program series. So I don't know, Mary Evelyn or Frankie, which of you is going to start, but the program is yours.
I only remember going to Chautauqua once. I remember my parents taking me down to the merry-go-round lady, and I guess I'm still there because I don't ever remember they're coming after me. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how the concept of Chautauqua started in the first place, just after the Civil War. And this book, that is called Chautauqua, and you can look at it after a while, is excellent. I want to take it. I want to get it out again someday and finish reading it. But Chautauqua, New York, you know how New York State comes down like this along Lake Erie, and then there's a little flat place and goes along the top of Pennsylvania. Well, right there in that little corner is Chautauqua. And a couple of men, a Methodist minister whose name was John Vincent, and then Lewis Miller, who was a layman. Neither one of them were very enthralled about camp meetings as such. And they felt that Christian education should be a little more in tune with youngsters, a little bit more like public education, and they wanted to adjust things a little more. One of the things that Vincent thought up was singing geography. And Frankie?
Oh yes, it went Maine, Augusta, on the Kennebec River, and all the way down through the states.
Only the one that he was going to do would be like, and don't ask me to do one specifically, like Palestine was the country that Jerusalem was in, and all that sort of thing, you know. And so he would have a little verse to go with the whole thing. Lewis Miller was a layman, and he introduced the grading of Sunday school classes. Evidently, Sunday school classes were all lumped together for youngsters from little bitty to age 15. Can you imagine what a mess that would be? You wouldn't understand anything. And he wanted the teacher training to be a combination of history and geography and Bible in a blend. And he built a scale model. Each one of these fellas built a scale model of Palestine, and it shows a picture of this in here.
Incidentally, this book is in the Fairfield Library, but here is quite a
it must have been
sizable exhibit.
The kids played in it. They would play tag, and if you were on Jerusalem, then that was a free spot. They had some of the figures made out of plaster, and every once in a while somebody would run off with Damascus. Kids hadn't changed a whole lot. They're very much the same as they are now. Something else that when they got started with their Chautauqua programs, they ended each day with the hymn, "The Day is Dying in the West," and John Vincent had written it. I looked it up in an old hymnal that I have, but I'll not sing that for you. They felt that recreation was an important item, that it should be included regularly, and that the sessions should last about 2 weeks. Then by 1900, Chautauqua concept was pretty well scattered over the United States. And the grand aim of Chautauqua was to elevate the masses, to give the community a mental, moral, and social and spiritual uplift. And people in general in the 1870s were not especially well educated. They were less traveled, more isolated in their residence. They didn't have surface roads, and of course no automobiles. Chautauqua arrived in Fairfield in 1904. And the Chautauqua founders had advanced people, that's what they call them in the circus, where they would go into a community and help them develop their Chautauqua program. And in this area it was a Reverend Tussey. And he came to Fairfield, and a group of prominent citizens met with him at the Leggett House. And let's talk just a little bit about that original committee, original board. Reverend Thomas Osborne, the pastor at the Methodist Church, was the chairman. Professor Powers, and I'm guessing he was from Parsons. Mrs. Charles Herring. What do you know about Mrs. Charles Herring?
Well, he was a cousin of my grandmother's, is all I know. And he was a grocer. And there's a memorial entrance here was from his endowment to the...
And anybody else that has something to add, by all means do. And O.J. Kellogg, and I don't know anything about O.J. Kellogg, Mrs. L.T. Gobble was Lee's grandmother. Mrs. R.B. Loudon, and I don't know where she fits into the... Miss Anna White was an elementary teacher in Fairfield and also was county superintendent, the predecessor to June Chittister.
Well, R.B. Loudon was at the Loudon Machinery.
Okay, but I don't know which.
No.
And his wife and they were camps, and Dr. James' wife was also was Mrs. R.B. Loudon's sister.
Oh. And A.K. Harper of Harper Brash, and J.A. Huglin, who was an attorney. And there was something else about the Huglin family.
Well, I think he had 3 sons that during World War II were generals.
And he's the only person that's ever had, that we know of, who has had 3 sons appointed to West Point. And the mannequin wearing a uniform over there is one of the Huglin boys' uniforms.
And the Huglins lived east of Fairfield, where the pond is, on the north side of the road. Originally, the New York State Chautauqua sold shares. That was the general practice, and their shares were $100 apiece. But here they sold shares. They decided they needed 200 shares to get their program off the ground, and they sold them for $10 apiece. And they managed to sell 208 shares, but as I read through the material, they really should have sold a few more. They were kind of on the verge all the time. Then the committee, the advertising committee, issued 10,000 booklets. Frankie, did you have that booklet?
Thanks to Jean Luedtke, I had access to that. You want me to tell about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Well, anyhow,
says Frankie right there on my notes.
Okay, good. Well, this Chautauquas were annually billed as Iowa's most successful summer assembly, and they ran for 2 weeks each summer from 1904 to 1931, as Mary Evelyn said. And in 1929, the silver anniversary billed the event as our Fairfield Chautauqua, the most successful Chautauqua in the country. And the large auditorium had seating capacity for 5,000 people.
Now that's interesting, because that number varies a little bit, but that's all right. I like 5,000.
That's a good round figure. And it had an up-to-date stage which is not excelled, not even equaled, outside of a larger city.
It made a terrifically good racetrack right around the outside perimeter for boys to run, and it had on the floor were pea-sized gravel, so that there was somewhat of a challenge to run rapidly. And it raised a terrific dust.
Now that was on the inside?
Outside.
Yes, on the inside.
Oh, on the inside.
Inside, you see, and the dust couldn't get away.
Oh, I see.
I mean, you could run around the outside too, but that wasn't much fun.
Disturbing.
Incidentally, Gene didn't introduce me, but I wasn't asked to be on here except by my wife. So,
That's all right.
But you see, I get involved in his stuff too, so.
But anyway, it was one of the best places in the West to have summer meetings at our Chautauqua. And now let's go back to this very first Chautauqua in 1904. Each day's program began with a prayer, and then an hour's Bible study was conducted by a local minister. And I noticed in 1929 that Reverend Polly from the Christian Church was the pastor in charge.
Every morning they had Bible study.
Every morning, that was, and all of the Bible students were invited to attend. And now this standard procedure of the Bible study was followed by music. And in 1904, this first Chautauqua, Miss Florence Pace, her publicity described her as a soprano soloist, was described as having beauty of face and attractive presence that won instant recognition, while her charming personality completely captivated everyone. They were bringing culture and education to the Midwest. And then Mr. Hobson, who was the hero of Santiago and Merrimack, spoke on America as Mistress of the Seas. See, you're getting education too. Now you remember in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was the president, and he had just sent our Navy on a wide world tour. And his motto was, speak softly, but carry a big stick. Sending that Navy around spoke something, didn't it? Then there was more Bible study. And then at 4 p.m., Dr. Dodds, and his general theme for the whole Chautauqua was epics in the story of redemption. That's what your Bible study featured. There was a choral chorus, and Miss Page sang again. But the big event was at 7:30 p.m. when Rassani, the Juggler, performed. Now he was billed as altogether a unique and captivating attraction. Last year he took the Chautauqua circuit by storm. His manager says there may be better jugglers than Rassani, but they're not in America. And his act is pleasing and clean. So you have the first day of Chautauqua in Fairfield. There was always something for everyone, though the Wesleyan Quartet made its debut, and Fairfield Band played, and it was probably directed by Gus Unkrich. He was a real popular band director back in those days.
Gus Unkrich had a boys band that was invited to tour the Chautauqua circuit.
Good, did they?
Well, I don't know. My dad was a trombonist, and he was asked to join them, but he couldn't because he had to work on the farm. But so I assume they did tour.
Well, that's great.
Incidentally, while I have the floor,
Yes.
that schedule reminds me of at the New York Chautauqua. They first stayed in tents through that week or 2 weeks, and then they built little cottages. And Mark Twain said they were so fragile that he could hear a woman change her mind in the other cottage. And also they had some rules. There was no giggling after 10 o'clock in the evening.
And you couldn't, something about morning.
In the morning, no chopping wood before 6 a.m. So, excuse me, go ahead.
After they had this booklet, 10,000 copies, they needed to choose a place to have the Chautauqua, a site. The first choice was Slagle's Grove, and that wasn't available. And then they thought about Parsons College, but there were no stables or hitching racks out there. So they finally settled on the county fairground. Now the county fairground at that time was on North 8th Street, where the county engineers' offices are. And there were pluses and minuses. There was less shade, but abundant water, There was poor drainage and poor protection from storms, but they had it there for 2 years anyway. And the first assembly was held in a tent, and the capacity was 2,500. Then, there were sites for 60 tents there in 1905. And there was also a dining hall tent. Then Slagle's Grove became available. And they began to talk about moving. But if you move to something, you've got to pay for it. And they knew they figured it would cost them $1,000 on or before October 1st, 1905, with 8 promissory notes of $1,000 each at 4% interest. That's not very much, is it? And due annually. And the debt became a burden. And this led to issuance of additional stocks. But there was a good supply of water, there were hitching racks, and there eventually, I think you talk about these water fountains after a while, won't you?
No, but I did hear something about
well,
that.
the 2 water fountains that are there now, they're square businesses. They were built by and by.
They were stucco with the roof over them.
The last one I tried to use didn't use very well.
Slagle's Grove, incidentally, of course, is Chautauqua Park now. But back when Fairfield was first founded in 1839, according to Susan Weldy's book, there was hardly a tree in sight in this whole area. But
Well, Ben Taylor used to talk about no trees.
yes, but according to Susan, a man by the name of Mitchell was fording Crow Creek there and broke the tongue in his wagon. He couldn't find any wood to repair it. So you visualize what a change. It said when the Indians quit burning the prairie, the pioneers let trees grow wherever they might, and of course planted trees. And so those oak have come since 1839. And I think that's probably right. Several years ago, the park board contacted me to cut out oak trees that were dying or dead and to saw them up for lumber, and those are in the park benches now. That lumber that in all those park benches came from those trees, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And incidentally, I hit a lot of nails with my sawmill because the people that camped there during Chautauqua hung up their lanterns and their clotheslines and their tents on those trees.
Why did the Indians burn the prairie?
They did it to chase game out, and that was the main thing. And of course, this new fresh grass coming, the buffalo would come in and eat that tender grass instead of that old dead straw.
So the buffalo would come to them rather than them looking for the buffalo.
That's the way I would interpret it.
Okay. Frankie, you want to talk some more about?
Well, one day, Dr. Robert Stewart MacArthur, who was the pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in New York City, was a guest speaker. And his publicity said, it is noted his ancestors were of the Highland clan MacArthur. Now, I don't know whether that's some of Doug's ancestors or not. But his mother was a Stuart of the ruling house of Scotland. And of course, then through Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart Queen of Scots, the royal family of England today are descendants of this Stuart family. But anyway, he spoke on the empire of the Tsars and the Great Bear of the North. And wouldn't that have been interesting to have heard his opinions in those days back in 1904? But he held them spellbound. And,
Excuse me, remember the Great Bear of the North, they met Russia, and the Japanese-Russian War was in 1803 or something like that.
so this
Just came to mind.
So everything gets all tangled up, doesn't it?
yeah, it's all
All at the same time.
all intermingled, isn't it? And then Dr. Eaton brought a telescope so they could look at the stars at night. That was quite interesting. And then there was the Honorable Charles Grosvenor of Ohio. He was a dyed-in-wool Republican. Now, he would have been welcome in Fairfield, wouldn't he? And Champ Clark of Missouri. And these two gladiators were geared for battle in the debate for the presidential campaign. And Teddy Roosevelt had just been nominated then for president. Now, he was president, he became president in 1901 when McKinley was assassinated. So this is the first time that he has been nominated as a president. However, he was acting one. And then Allan Parker of New York was a Democrat. He got lost in history. I don't think we ever heard of him again. But anyway, that was another one of the big features. And outstanding personalities came in 1905, Booker T. Washington and William Jennings Bryan. And then Bryan came again in 1916, and he ran for president 3 times. And he was known as the Golden Tongue Orator. And he wanted to get the United States off that gold standard, and his cry was, "I will not crucify man upon a cross of gold."
William Jennings Bryan spoke at Sioux Falls at one time, and transportation was a big problem during, especially the early times. And for some reason, he got hung up 30 miles away from Sioux Falls, and finally hired a wagon and got to Chautauqua at 12:30 at night, and the people were still waiting, and he finished up speaking well past midnight.
He must have been a golden tongued orator.
You could hear his voice any place, in any ways near the proximity where he's speaking, without any microphone.
Didn't have that.
Well, they paid their money.
Well, that's
Money
true.
was hard to
and
come
they were
by.
patient. Yes, but some of these modern get-togethers, I've heard riots starting, and they, of course, they paid money too. But
And then in 1910, a lecturer was Tahan, an Indian, and his subject was things I said and did when I was a savage. That was interesting for the time. And Mr. Wright talked about the Pure Food Law in 1911, and a Dr. Sable did blood pressures. And that was quite new. And he explained its reason and values. And then before long, when you went to the doctor's office for your exam, you had your blood pressure taken. And then in 1917, moving pictures were shown. I don't think Grandma Beatty was. She always went to Chautauqua. She wouldn't go to the movies. But if it was at Chautauqua, perhaps she did attend. And then there were no programs in World War in 1918 because of World War I. And now back up to 1906, Evelyn, tell them about Billy Sunday.
Oh, Keith, you said your dad saw Billy Sunday one
yeah,
time.
Billy Sunday was an evangelist, but prior to that, he was a professional. He was a big league baseball player, and when he came up on the stage down here at Fairfield, he went up on the stage doing handsprings. And that was quite impressive, especially to little boys.
I figured that Billy Sunday was about 44 when he was here. And prior to being an evangelist, he was worked just as hard as being a professional baseball player. And when he was here, the Ladies Improvement Society set up a baseball game at the old fairground, and I don't know who played, and I don't know, maybe Sunday pitched on one side, and then he ran around and pitched on the other side, I don't know. But they raised $125, and they used the money to build the first bandstand. Now, I'm assuming it was the first one, the one that we remember.
Excuse me, I think Billy Sunday was an outfielder.
Oh, sorry. And he was the outfielder on one
But I'm
side, and then
not
on the
sure.
other side. And sidewalks in Central Park for $125. That was pretty good. But he was about 44 when he came to Fairfield and was a professional baseball pitcher wherever he stood on the diamond. And when he was in April in 1907, when he'd been here before, didn't he come twice out at the fairgrounds?
I can't say.
Well, the more I read, the more confused I became. But anyway, the committee decided that he should have a tabernacle to speak from. And they were going to set this tabernacle at the intersection of Adams and 5th Street. It would have been in behind Logan Apartments someplace. Adams Street is a dead end.
No.
5th Street's a dead end.
Yeah.
And so I'd been in there someplace. And the Reverend Osborne from the Methodist Church was to be the chairman of the solicitation for funds for this project, with the guarantee. They figured it would cost $3,200 to build this thing and would seat 3,000 people. And the guarantee in the project was that after Sunday had used it for his programs, then the tabernacle would be dismantled and moved to Chautauqua Park, which it was. It was enlarged a little, and a stage was built across.
Is that the band shell?
That was part of it.
Well, no. Well, yeah, out on Chautauqua Park. Yeah, yeah. And so they did that. And I guess Sunday was very successful. He had the first night didn't amount to much, but after that he really got going good. Then when it came time to dismantle the building, volunteers dismantled it, and then they put it together again. Now, in Mark's picture of the building, it doesn't show that there are awnings on the side. But Keith and I discussed this, and we think there were the wooden walls, the upper half of the wooden walls, lifted up, so so that you got ventilation on both sides. You remember it that way, Jenna? And that would let some of the dust out that these kids raised. And later there were, after it was enlarged, it held 4,000 people, plus the platform. And some kids that I know, grown-up kids, say that platform was lots of fun to play on after the building itself was gone. And then there were dressing rooms added, and I don't know if those dressing rooms were in the basement. There were restrooms in the basement. Anybody know? They were. There was more space than just enough for restrooms, and they got pretty shabby toward the end. I remember that part. In 1936, Fairfield had a heavy snow. It was so heavy that it caved in Chautauqua building. And they decided not to use it anymore.
It was heavy enough snow that they brought in work trains from the mountains with their big rotary snow plows to move snow, because regular train engines we used here with the blade on front couldn't clear the tracks.
And I think they took bids on it, or sold it at auction maybe, and Earl Hennis bought the building and demolished it for salvage. And the stage and restrooms remained. Now my question, well, I have two questions. Well, you told about the floor in the so I won't ask the question again, what the floor
Unless I don't remember it correctly.
How long did that stage stay in use, and there were restrooms underneath out Chautauqua Park? It was there until they built the new restrooms, but I don't have any calendar for that. And the stage was down about to the road, to the drive that goes through the park, and it was in this bowl, natural bowl, and at the south end of the natural bowl were the water fountains.
That band shell was still there after World War II, because I remember going out there to picnic shortly after World War II.
Okay. Okay, but, yeah, okay.
But just the shell, I don't
Yeah.
remember the other part.
And at that time, there weren't as many drives out there as there are now. The playgrounds were there. The shelters were going up. What did we find? WPA.
The two brick picnic shelters were built in 1936, I believe.
WPA
There was
people came in.
WPA, Works Progress Administration
Okay.
people.
Was there a dining hall at Slagle's Grove?
Oh, yes. Yes, I have some
Okay.
information on
Okay. What
Well,
do you know about it?
that. At Slagle's Grove, that for $2.50, you want to tell about the rent
Sure.
of it? You could rent a wall tent that was 10 by 12 for only $2.50, and then for $1 you could rent a lot to put it on, and this included the whole time of the Chautauqua. And if you wanted a 12 by 14 tent, it was available for $3.75, and then $1 more for the lot.
Well, that'd be for 2 weeks.
Yes, the whole bit, the whole ball of wax. And you could have a board floor for $1 more. Now, you could rent tents by the day for 50 cents. And for $7, you could rent a tent with family compartments. And then there were chairs and tables, cots, and 2-burner oil stoves for rent if you did not have your own.
You could probably hear women change their mind 2 tents over.
Now, I didn't say that. I thought about it, but I didn't say it.
They were closed. That's probably why there weren't any trees, too. They had all these tents out there. And there was a dining hall serving good meals for only 25 cents, and all kinds of wholesome refreshments were available.
Yes,
guess that-
liquor wasn't allowed,
No,
period.
absolutely
That was
not.
prohibition.
And the advanced season tickets were $1.50, and then on opening day they went to $2. And a single general admission was 25 cents, or children 15 cents. Now, 2 season tickets, that'd be $3, $2.50 to rent a tent and a lot. And for $6.50, a couple could attend the whole Chautauqua
Oh, 2 weeks.
and see all the shows for $6.50.
A lady told me a few years ago that I think they lived in Walnut Township, and that her father always parked his car so that he could make a quick getaway after the program was over, because he knew what the roads were going to be like, and he didn't want to eat everybody else's dust all the way home.
Remember, I think it was 1926, we got our 2 pavements right around there, the 2 highways, and all the rest of the roads were dirt for some time.
And I don't think number 1 south of town the whole thing wasn't paved to Chautauqua at that time, I'm sure. I don't remember how far.
Speaking of transportation, I was asked to talk about that, so maybe I'll
Oh, yes.
interrupt there. It was quite a job to get to some of these for the performers. Let's see, what later became President Hayes or Harding hired a carriage or something to take him to Chautauqua, and he ended up at a carnival. Chautauqua was so popular that other enterprises named them Chautauqua, so this is a Chautauqua Carnival.
Well, and at the same time, there were some people that went to a hotel, some people that were connected with Chautauqua, and I don't remember where this was. And when the desk clerk found out that they were connected with Chautauqua, they said they wouldn't let them stay because they
Got to show
were
people.
rowdy.
Show people.
Yes, show people.
Show people.
Yet they're most straight-laced.
There it was.
And there's a magician was trying to get someplace.
Magician. Not a magician, a
magician. And it was an electric train, and they wouldn't take his trunk of material. But he bought a coffin and put it in that, and they said that they would take coffins, and he claimed he was taking his relative. Another one drowned in a flood trying to cross a stream. One started a fire on the railroad track because this was a non-stop train, and of course he got on the train when it stopped.
The show must go on.
Let's see, I believe that's some of the more interesting travel. But quite often the audience had to wait considerable length of time. One time it mentioned that they had such a crowd in standing room only, they stood for 4 hours before the speaker came.
I think, and I read someplace about what the speakers did with their time when they weren't actually working. They'd come in this town, they didn't know anybody, maybe it was kind of a podunk anyway, and they were to appear at, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon and maybe 7 in the evening. And then what did they do with the rest of their time? And sometimes they had a little refreshment along the side, and I don't know if they were ever late to work or not, but it was a stressful thing. Do you have, Frankie, about how much these people were paid?
No, I didn't.
Well, someplace I have. I think the magician, one of the magicians, was paid $50 for a performance, and some of them some of the entertainers up to $200 for a performance. But I called someone on community concert and asked how this compared, and she said, well, there would be several zeros put on a figure like that for the concerts now. That there really wasn't any comparison. But of course the facilities were no comparison either.
No.
One other item I ran on to that I thought was interesting was the director of activities was instructed by the president of Chautauqua, this is at New York, that he needed to design a game, especially for the children, especially the boys, between football and what was the other? Football and baseball. In other words, a winter game. And so in 1902, James Nesmith invented basketball. And this is the only major sport in the world, according to this kid, this Chautauqua, that was invented entirely by one man.
Were there sponsors for these
Oh, yes.
programs?
You talked about this booklet that was distributed, and I think that's lying there someplace.
Okay.
But I was captivated by the merchants in 1904. The business appeared to be booming, and there are many, many familiar names. I want to share a few with you. Well, first of all, though, if you wanted some cream fruit raspberry to coconut dandies, you could buy any of these lovely chocolates for 10 cents a pound. And you could buy your Elgin wristwatch at T.E. McLean's, and there's still a jewelry store there today, that same location, only now it's called Gimbel's.
Maybe if Jenna scratches around in the vault, she'll find one of those. You know? Find one.
And nearby, now in 1871, Ed Hunt opened a shoe store. And then in 1904, Chautauqua year, it was Hunt and Ireland. In the same location on the north side of the square. It had been a shoe store there all these years until just recently when Brown Shoe Fit moved out to Highway 34 West. Oh, and an advertisement said, don't buy a cream separator until you have seen those at J.H. Taylor's carriage shop. So you're combining separators and carriages. And another popular combination was C. Carrick & Company for up-to-date furniture and undertaking. I suppose it was up-to-date undertaking.
No, that was
too.
quite common. In fact, I think the undertaker in one of the little towns, maybe not Batavia, north of here, not too many years ago, was still selling furniture.
Burnett in Keosauqua and Milton had undertaking and furniture.
Yeah.
In Farmington,
Incident-
they had the same thing.
Yeah, it was just a
It
very
was
common.
furniture
common
store,
thing.
Page Furniture Store and funeral
Uh-huh,
director.
very
yeah.
common.
Incidentally, one of the performers had to hire a hearse to get to his Chautauqua engagement, so.
And now here's another familiar name, Louis Toma. Louis Toma was an undertaker on the southwest corner of the square. And Dr. E.C. Bach, he was my first dentist here, remember him? Dr. Bach. He was a dentist in 1904 over Schreiner and Swayze. Now that was before Till Johnson, when it became Schreiner and Johnson. Dr. Chet Fordyce described Till Johnson as a young punk who came over here from Salini.
Till Johnson, the kids that went to country school bought their own books. And Johnson's drugstore had the responsibility
And
of,
new ones too.
well, new and used books.
Mhm.
And well, you were down in his basement one time, weren't you?
Yes, I wanted something a little unusual, and so Till took me down into his basement. I felt quite privileged. It was quite an assortment down there with a wood dirt floor, but he went right exactly to where it was. And
Well, somebody said it was just a maze down there. You went up one aisle and down the other.
yes,
It was. I've been there. And then the Gaines Brothers Hardware. Now you may remember old Mr. Gaines out at Dexter. I think this was he and his brother. And then he was also the father of Louis Gaines. But the Gaines Hardware was located on the west side of the square, and it was later the site of Goblin here. But Gaines sold washing machines, hay forks, and blue flame oil stoves. Now you young people, those oil stoves were not for heating. They were for cooking, and it replaced that old kitchen range in the summertime.
Smelled terrible.
Yes, they did, and they rode up and smoked things
That's the
too.
reason you cooked on the back porch.
Right. And then Gobble and Here were on the north side, and of course that was Lee's grandfather and father. And they had their own tailors to make suits and trousers. And Milt Cuddy had a dry goods store too. Now Milt Cuddy was Bill Baker's uncle, and you may remember reading in the Ledger several years ago, and he'd talk of the wonderful Christmases they had at Uncle Milt's house. And my husband, when he was a little boy, had much rather get his caps at Milt Cuddy's than over at the fair store run by Charlie Wade, because Miss Milt Cuddy's caps had lots longer bills. He liked those better. And then at J.C. Thorne's, you could buy a shirtwaist. Now, a shirtwaist, we call them now a blouse. And they also had shirtwaist suits, summer skirts, and muslin underwear. I suppose that was those BVDs and that sort of thing.
Wasn't that on the north side of the square toward the east end of the block?
I think it was.
I think
I
so.
think it was. And Rist and Hustetler had dry goods, and they sold Cabo corsets. Now, there was a lot of demand for those things in those days, too. Johnson and Strum were tailors on the east side. And, of course, Mr. Johnson was Dixie Johnson's grandfather. So we have lots of familiar names here. R.J. Wilson and A.G. Jordan practiced law. R.J. Wilson was Raleigh Wilson, the son of Senator James Wilson. And, of course, A.G. Jordan was Art, who was the father of Scott. So we still have a lot of these things. Let's see, you mentioned, and Hugland, we mentioned that about Smith's sons. And then Bradshaw, another familiar name, Bradshaw and Jericho had a drugstore on the southwest corner of the square. And the Fairfield Tribune, still in business, see, so many of these names still current. They had also was a newspaper, and they had a contest for this 1904 presidential election. And for $1, you could renew your subscription to the Tribune for a whole year. Then you got 4 chances to guess on the outcome of the election. And again, this is Teddy Roosevelt in 1904. But I think the way it ran is who guessed the closest number of voters in Iowa. But anyway, the prizes. The first prize for winning this contest was a $400 piano. And the second and third prize, you got building lots. You got a building lot. Second prize and third prize was a building lot in Fairfield. And the fourth prize was a Charter Oak wagon. Now we've got oh, you just can't quite see it from here. Just back of that sleigh, there is a miniature Charter Oak wagon on the balcony, but you have to go just a little bit further back to see that. When I was showing some fourth graders, second graders through not long ago and telling them about the wagon and everything, they looked at it and said, "What makes it go?"
They were made here in Fairfield as attorney wagon works.
Attorney wagon works. Yes, I forgot to say that. I guess I thought you knew it. And then the fifth prize was a set of Loudon hay tools. And wouldn't Mark love to have those tools now? And the First National Bank was established in 1865, still here. But in 1904, listen to this capital, it had $100,000 capital and $50,000 for surplus and profits. And B.S. McElhenney, another familiar name, McElhenney House, was president of this First National Bank, and R.J. Wilson, Raleigh Wilson, was the vice president. And some familiar names at Parsons College: R. Monroe McKenzie, PhD professor of physics and chemistry. I remember him. Dr. Frederick Clark lectured in bacteriology, and Cora Ball, New England Conservatory of Music, 1902, was instructor in piano, and then Fred Hunt instructed in violin. But all of these above, and a lot more, were the movers and shakers in Fairfield in 1904.
Dr. Clark owned the second automobile in Fairfield. I don't know who owned the first one.
Who built Slocum's house? Jimmy Beck. Jimmy Beck had an early car. Daddy said that was the first car that he rode in, and it began to get dark, and they had to stop and get out and light the lamps before they could proceed. We'll go back to 1927, and times were beginning to get a little hard, and Chautauqua was beginning to fade. And they tried some improvements. They tried movies. Wasn't that when they put the water in?
It could be electricity and lots of improvements.
Yes. I think they strung lights around the campground.
Well, movies were coming in, roads were improving. At one time, this was the only thing there was in the way of wholesome entertainment and education for everyone.
You waited all year for Chautauqua. And then in 1930, there was a consideration of using the park for a United States government hospital, but no action was taken. And Chautauqua was a wonderful idea, but dwindled because of lack of finances, dwindling attendance, automobiles, people could travel farther, moving pictures, radios, and it officially ended an era in 1933. We want you to look at the things we have in display now. I thought that the niftiest thing that it talked about was this Palestine that these men developed, and the shenanigans that kids would pull. They'd run off with parts of some of the buildings, but it was big. It looked like there was a creek ran down the middle of it.
That was in Jordan. Maybe there's some questions.
So there's somebody has some memories of Chautauqua to share with us.
Yes.
I have a question. What made Billy's son to give up his baseball to become an evangelist?
Age, probably. He was 44.
Well, he got the word, I think. That was part of it. When his knees began to give out.
He could still do somersaults. He must not have been that.
Well, yeah, but you didn't have. That was just one.
His reaction time.
You didn't play for several hours. You didn't turn somersaults for several hours.
And then I've got another question.
Okay.
You said something about the Juggler did a clean act.
He didn't.
It was a clean and wholesome act.
What would be an unclean juggling act?
Well, think of something.
Gestures, the dress,
The dress.
what you want,
I'm
gestures
sorry,
you could make and all that sort of thing, naughty things you could say, naughty things you could
Okay.
juggle, but
Okay.
this was all clean and wholesome, so
Okay.
the children and the Sunday school teachers could all come.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else have any add or subtractions? Did we make any terrible drastic mistakes?
I've got another
Yes.
question. You said something about that people weren't very educated back in that early, and yet those wonderful letters that everybody wrote during the Civil War would indicate that people had a wonderful
The
education.
education they got in grade school was terrific.
It's just that
My parents went to the same school building all the time. Now, maybe only in the winter, but they went until they were 20 years old. And I'm sure my father only went in the wintertime.
But you see, this, you didn't have TV and as many newspapers and books, and so to hear what somebody thought about the Tsar and the bear.
I see. You mean the broadening of
Yes,
the
right.
and music, that sure we had the band and we had Parsons College and that sort of thing, but it was broadening and gave you more variety and a wider education.
Limited.
And these were a local school. This is a school, one-room
Miles
school that the kids could walk to, was that close. And the director lived right there. And if that teacher did produce, she was gone.
Well, and lots of times there would be three. I can't think of the word. There would be the fall term,
Terms.
fall term, winter term, and spring term. And a youngster might only go to one term a year.
And he had to be out if he's a boy to help in the field.
Well, right. So that's the reason you only went winter term. And probably limited publications came to their house.
No internet service.
Right. Not a very good U.S. mail service. They had to go quite a little ways lots of times to even get their mail before rural free delivery came in.
And you may not even have a phone. I
Right.
remember the way we got our phone hooked up.
Right.
Right. So
And-
this was big time to come to.
And the story is that someone was trying to call the doctor it was party lines, because it was going to be a new baby and the father needed assistance, and the receivers kept going down, and finally Papa said, "Everybody hang up, I'll call you back and let you know what it is."
Oh, I remember something else it said too, that it suggested that the farmers come and rent their tents and stay there, but then make arrangements for one or two to go back and forth to do the chores,
yes.
but to stay there and enjoy the
Yes.
Chautauqua.
I did read that.
It was an early stage of babysitting. They had babysitting situation.
Oh, yeah,
Chautauqua.
yeah. And the merry-go-round.
Yes, but these children were
Yes,
taken care
yes,
of. You know, they
yes.
had their naps and
Uh-huh.
their lunch and so forth.
And in 1927, they got telephones out there, so you could call from there to bring food. The grocers would deliver stuff for you.
Oh,
at
like
your
a
tents.
deli?
At your tents. No, they'd bring your.
Well, I know, but
Yes.
like now.
Yes, that they
Uh-huh.
deliver to you.
Oh. But
So-
yes.
How many people did they think attended? Do you have an idea?
Oh, I read that someplace. I don't remember.
Well,
I don't remember.
It varied from 2,500 to 5,000 seating and in the auditorium, and then there would be kids running around that weren't in that auditorium. There would be people visiting and doing things. So I would imagine that the attendance was sizable.
Well, yeah, if they could seat 5,000 at one time, and they had 14 days.
Standing room only, you said.
Yeah.
So what was the population of Fairfield like in 19?
Well, the population of the county has remained fairly stable. The Civil War population in Jefferson County is about the same as it is now. However, Fairfield's population was, 2,000 or 3,000 early on.
1904. It was
And
better than that.
so you still had a lot of people that were within driving distance with a horse, the same population as now.
I found the charge in 1904. Captain Jack Crawford, whoever he was, he gave a lecture for $100. And Lieutenant Hobson, $175, and 2 lectures. Sam Jones would give 2 lectures. I have no idea what Sam talked about, for $200.
Well, Dobson's the one who was the hero in Merrimack and Santiago.
Oh, okay, okay. But they did have a variety, and music was very popular. So,
Well, good. I've been fascinated in listening to the program today. I've heard so many stories over the years. I do have some photo postcards over here to look at. There's a stock certificate, some tickets, and I think we have a complete set of Chautauqua programs for the entire period to look at, and they can be taken out and looked at. And one of the things I do want to take out is to show one of them or two of them includes a map of the grounds and where the streets were. There was a Chautauqua Street, there was a Fairfield Street, and essentially they ran the hilltops, and then the camping was off on both sides of those. So it's an interesting part of Fairfield's heritage. Next month's program is going to be on a number of World War II posters that have been donated to the museum, and Nell Swigard and her husband are going to present that program, and we're going to talk about a lot of the propaganda, the artwork, and things that went into these programs. So I think it'll be a nice program. That'll be the second Sunday in October. So thank you very much for everybody attending. Thank you for FPAC filming today. This FPAC provides an opportunity for a lot of people in Fairfield to view the programs that aren't able to come up and see them personally. So we do appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Frankie and Mary Evelyn and Keith for doing the program. And I'd like to have a nice round of applause for them. And you're welcome to look over everything that we have here and